Thank you very much for inviting me back again. It's a delight to be back at St. John's, and I'm privileged to be here. Thank you. Just before I was ordained a deacon in Southwark Cathedral, you have that little ritual that most ordinands, those going to be ordained, have to, or are required to, or expected to go through, which is that during the retreat that we have prior to our ordination as deacons, we're interviewed by a bishop. And the bishop that interviewed me was a man called Michael Marshall. He didn't go on to be a diocesan bishop. He ended up, I think, being the vicar of St. Holy Trinity, Sloane Square in London. But, this is the first time I'd done anything like this. I was feeling a bit nervous, a bit anxious. What's this going to be about? What are the questions he's going to ask me? I'm not prepared for anything, really. And I suppose sometimes it's best not to be prepared because you won't be disappointed or anxious. And so I sat in front of Michael Marshall, and he looked at me and said, from a rather imperious large chair sitting on a stool that I was, he said, so tell me, David, what's God been up to? What's God been up to in your life? And you have one of those moments when that question comes to you out of the blue. You can imagine you being asked that question, what has God been up to? And I'm sitting there as an ordinand wondering how I'm going to respond, what I'm going to say. And then I started to, that little mild panic that goes through you. Yes, well, Bishop, last year, and he stopped me. And he said, David, I'm really not interested in last year. That's history. That's history. So I continued fumbling about in the memory banks of my brain. I said, well, last month. And he looked at me again, and I kind of knew, you begin to know the pattern of the conversation, don't you? And he said to me, I'm really not interested in what happened last month. So I scrabbled about and dug even deeper and searched even further. And I said, well, last week. And he said, no, I'm not really interested in last week. I thought, there's nothing left, is there? There's nothing left in my diary. What do you want? He said, I'm interested in what God is up to today in your life. Who is God for you? Who is God for you right now sitting in front of me? I can't remember for the life of me the answer that I gave Michael Marshall, but I do remember that conversation. In fact, I remember it so vividly that I can see him sitting there in my imagination. I remember the room very well, and I remember the questions even more. I remember those questions which kind of cut through me, they might cut through you. What has God been up to? Who is God for you? Who is God for you? Who was God for the people of Israel? Who was God for them? And where was God going to be for them? That reading from Isaiah chapter 51 is written in what they call exile. Mesopotamia is running rampage through the land. It's taking captives wherever it can. Israel is captive. It's seeking salvation. It's longing for release. It's longing for freedom. And when you're cornered, and when you find yourself between a rock and a hard place, as the people of Israel are finding themselves as recorded in Isaiah 51, you do begin to wonder where God is and who God is for you. Who is God for you? Who do they say that I am? Jesus asked Peter. Who are people saying that I am? Who is he for you? Who am I for you? Who do you say that I am? Who is God for us? Who is God for St. John's Fareham during a time of vacancy? Who is God going to be for you? Where is God going to be for you during a time of vacancy? And I think there are little clues in Isaiah 51 that really help us to get a grip on what we do when we feel that we're in a tight corner, in a tight pastoral or personal corner. What do we do? Where are we? Who is God for us? Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Isaiah has the God-given inspiration and wisdom to say three things to the people of Israel in exile, between, as I said, a rock and a hard place, between longing for freedom and yet being in captivity, between being active and being passive, being done to, almost, or actually being done to. And he asks them to do three things, and I'll just run over those three things very briefly. He asks them to look back at what God has been for them in the past, in history. Where has God been for them? What has God rescued them from? Where has God been leading them? So he asks that question first. Look back. Listen to me, you that pursue righteousness, you that seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn. Did you hear that? Look to the rock from which you were hewn. Look back to see how your life has been shaped and carved by God in the past. What has God been up to? How has God shaped you? Who has been important to you? Where has God led you that you didn't expect to be led? Certainly the people of Israel weren't expecting to be led into captivity. But look back, and look back with a sense that God had a purpose in the past for your life, that God has a purpose for the whole of the nation of Israel, and did have in the past. Look back with gratitude. That word gratitude comes up once or twice in Isaiah 51, that sense of thankfulness, that sense of praise, that sense of security that God, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what the circumstances are, God has plan and God has purpose because he has in the past. So look back. So I wonder today if you could look back with deep gratitude for the journey that God has brought you on thus far. And what are the markers that you can put down? Because say, yes, I remember that. I remember that moment when God was particularly close. God was particularly active. Perhaps it was a tough situation, who knows? Look back to the rock from which you were hewn and from the quarry from which you were dug. I love that phrase. Look back to the rock from which you were hewn and the quarry from which you were dug. That's a bit binding, a bit grounding, isn't it, really? Look back and then look around. Look around today. Look around today to see just what God is up to. We live in dire times. There's a lot going on. We're very anxious as a nation. We are an anxious nation. There's anxiety and a sense of insecurity and fear and loss and war and famines and floods. And Isaiah speaks, of course, into some of those very same issues of rebellion and defeat. And where is God? Who is God going to be for us? So look around and see the little pockets of fire where God is at work. Where is God at work? Don't believe that he's not at work. He has purpose and power and a place for you within his plan. So look around, speak to your neighbours. What's God been up to? That question that Michael Marshall asked me many decades ago when I was about to be ordained a deacon. What's God been up to? Ask each other the questions because it draws out faith from them and for you. What's God been up to? Look around. Listen to me, my people, and give heed to me, my nation. For a teaching will go out from me, and my justice for a light to the peoples. I will bring my deliverance very swiftly. And then look up. Look up, because the world in which we live is not haphazard. It had been created for purpose. And God's intention at the very beginning was to form order out of the chaos. And there's a lot of chaos around, and we long for God to bring back that sense of, of order and of place and of purpose for us as a nation again. Perhaps in your own life, you've come this morning with a sense of, well, life is a bit chaotic for me. Life isn't even. Life isn't as you may feel it's not fair to you. All sorts of emotions and thinking and feelings we bring into our worship as we come in through the doors there. But Isaiah says that's not the ground from which you begin. That's not the place from which you begin. The instinct might be to begin there, but actually our call is to look up to God who has plan and purpose for us and to say, God, be for me what you were. For those who ask the question, of whom you ask the question, who do people say that I am? Be for me the great I am. Be for me the great I am. Turning our longings into prayer. Turning our longings into prayer. I wonder how easy you find it is to bring the circumstances of your life back to God and to root them in God, to look up to the heavens. And so Isaiah says, lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth beneath. We stand in that wonderful zone between heaven and earth. And God has purpose for us in this place at St. John's during a time, I pray, of not protracted vacancy. My salvation will be forever, and my deliverance will never end. Michael Marshall, who for all sorts of reasons did some really quite silly things in his life, which stopped him from being a diocesan bishop, nevertheless wrote an extraordinary book, which I treasured very early on in my curacy in South London. And he gave it a title which has stuck with me. And it was simply called Glory Under Your Feet. Glory under your feet. I just wonder how much glory might have passed you by that was under your feet, and how much glory you will recognize today as you go about your business this week, this month, as you think about the future. Look back to the past, be aware of God in the present, and know that God has his hand on you for the future, and that we live in that place where we can look up to the heavens in gratitude and thankfulness for all that God has been for us, and look down as well. Look down at the earth beneath, the rock from which we were hewn, to see God at work in our lives. God using the stuff that you are made of, the stuff you are yet to become, to transform the world, and certainly to transform this part of St. John's Fareham. Look back, look around, look up. And let God be for you in Christ all that he longs to be for you, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. Amen.